Is everyone looking at our first slide?
Yes.
All right, thank you so much. You know, it's funny. Remember how intimidated we used to be by Zoom like 2 years ago when we're all paralyzed by, oh, what do we do next and what button do we push? Now it's like this is a way of life. Zoom, come on, bring us something that's difficult to understand. So this is what we're going to talk about: the birds and the bees, and how to talk about it not only with your kids but with each other, because we're going to be seeking advice from each other, right? Those of you who are parents, you're going to find someone who's more experienced at this than you are and ask advice from someone who's already goofed up and is around that corner. So that's my first piece of advice. So why are we talking about this? Let me get my display pane all set here. So, you know, I never asked why in particular the Baltimore church wanted to discuss this. I figure you have some good reason. Maybe something has come up, I don't know. The point is, it's super important to talk about. This is something we got to talk about, and someone's got to do it. And too many of us as parents don't, because we're embarrassed or we're hesitant or we don't know how to go about it. So it is a very important topic that we're going to deal with today. And it's kind of always puzzled me, why do parents feel so uncomfortable talking about this? Yeah, it's awkward, but you can't let the awkwardness keep you from talking at all. So the first thing I want you to think about is, how did you learn about the birds and the bees? And I don't mean the literal birds and bees, I mean the metaphor, you know, how did you learn about sex when you were a kid? Now, to model being open, I'm going to share with you a lot of really embarrassing things about my life, just to model being open about this very awkward subject. So I was thinking, how did I learn about this? Some of you who I've spoken to before know that my dad passed away when I was very young, and I'm the youngest kid, but the only boy. So there was my poor mother, and my sister's a lot older than I am, so they were already out of the house. There was my poor mother with no clue how to talk about this subject with a little boy, because she didn't have my dad there to manage this for her. So what she did was not deal with it at all, leaving me to learn this stuff from someplace else. Now, I want to tell you that to make sure that I was around men and good examples, my mom every summer sent me off to summer camp. Now, I'm not talking about the 1 week long summer camp like some of us are used to. The camp I went to, you went for 2 full months. You were gone for 2 months, and you only got to see your parents once in the middle, like for 1 day in the middle. So here I was, a stupid, you know, and it was a mostly Jewish camp. I was raised Jewish. So if you know anything, this sounds terrible, but if you know anything about Jewish culture, if you've ever read Portnoy's Complaint, you know that little Jewish boys already have neuroses about sexuality. It's how we were born and raised. So there I was with a mom that felt this was too awkward to discuss. So in the camp I went to, you were with these same boys every summer. We kind of grew up together. That's who I learned about the birds and bees from. The 8-year-old, my fellow 8-year-old neurotic experts who were just idiots. We were all idiots, but we all acted like and thought we knew everything. So I learned absolutely everything incorrectly. And I still think I'm dragging some of that along with me. I don't know. You'd have to ask Mary about that. So we don't want that to happen. That's why we're having this talk tonight. So you don't succumb to the same misery that I did. And the other reason we need to talk about this is not to do so these days could be dangerous. We need to be urgent about this. I'm glad you brought it up. Let's blame social media for everything. Not only is it a good, convenient thing to blame, but usually it's true. So any ills in the world you can think of, any tools of Satan, you can usually blame social media. But that's where a lot of kids, if we don't deal with this, that's where a lot of kids are gonna hear about the birds and the bees. Social media, locker rooms, any place where misinformation abounds, that's where our kids are going to learn about sexuality if we don't deal with this. Now, it sounds, my situation was kind of amusing, but nowadays, if we don't arm our kids with information, it's the danger of social media makes them vulnerable to predation and manipulation. This is a very serious thing. And Mary and I, working with kids for almost 40 years, the last 10 to 20 years has blown our minds, seeing how these poor kids stumble into situations that they have no clue how to govern, how to deal with, and they end up becoming prey to some pretty unsavory people. So I don't want to scare you, but there have been scary situations that we've seen. I just want to be urgent. I want to say this is a timely time to have this talk, and there are good reasons that we're having this talk. So how do we go about this? What we're going to do is we're going to look at different age groups, because you can't handle this. There's no one size fits all for delivering this kind of information. So we're going to break things down into kind of age groups. But first, let's talk about some general principles that apply to all age groups when talking about this subject. Number one, no taboo subjects. Nothing can be off the table when it comes to sexuality in kids. We'll deal with the hows and the nuts and bolts of how to go about it, but nothing is too awkward, nothing is too complicated that it can't be explained clearly to kids. If you have any taboo subjects, if there's something your kids ask you about but you're unwilling to talk about, then what's going to happen? They're going to speculate, or they're going to try to find information from all the wrong sources. Tamika, while we were getting ready to go on, told us about her. I'm sorry, Tamika, I think it was your daughter or son that asked about, does daddy give mommy massages? Yeah, that's pretty awkward, but that's an excellent question. That can't be off the table. You're going to have to answer that. It sounds like she did a great job. It's the further questioning that got her into trouble, it sounds like. But no taboo subjects. Nothing is off the table, because if you don't, kids are going to speculate and use their little minds, or they're going to seek out their little peers as references. So everything has to be dealt with. And you're going to hear from kids some shocking things. And you're going to say, where did they even hear about that? You're going to have a 6-year-old ask you about oral sex, and your mind is going to explode. But you're not going to be able to say, we'll talk about that when you're grown up, or we'll talk about that later when you're ready. That's what we're going to arm you with tonight. So no taboo subjects, nothing is off the table. Another piece of advice is start early. You know, in Mary's and my day, the birds and bees talk was a one and done thing, right? It was like, you had this big talk, and it usually happened when you were about 13, except for my mom. And you got sat down, and it was really awkward. And, your mother and I wanted to talk about something. And it was this one and done thing, and everyone kind of sweat through it, and it was awkward. And that was it. All the research says, and I've done some research on this, kids and teens who have regular conversations with their parents and caregivers about sex and relationships are less likely to do risky sexual behavior and more likely to be healthy and safe. So this is not a one-time talk. This is an all-the-time talk, and you're going to start early. Number 3 general principle is, and this is something we can all learn, to decrease the chances of any misunderstanding, please use anatomically correct terms. To not do so is a little bit confusing. And if you think about it, there aren't really many terms that are so big or so complicated that you can't say it and little kids can't pronounce it, except maybe, I don't know, vaginismus or some disease or something like that. That's not what we're talking about. Use anatomically correct terms. I'm going to give you another terrible example from my personal life. My mother used the word tinky, Tinkie, to refer to both my penis and the act of urination. So this word tinky, which she could barely pronounce because it was so awkward for her, had 2 meanings. I never knew which one she was talking about. And thank goodness in grammar school, I learned about parts of speech. And I said, Mom, are you talking about the noun or the verb? And it was very confusing. And to this day, sometimes I get them mixed up. I'm just saying. So always use anatomically correct terms. We've got grandkids now. We've got 5 grandkids who are all 6 years old and under. They can all say penis and vagina. I believe they can. I've not tested them, but I'm pretty sure they can. No sex words are too big to pronounce. Listen more and talk less. We're parents. What are we used to doing as parents? We lecture. We love to lecture. We love to point the finger and shake the finger. We love to pontificate. And if you do that too much, you'll see it in your kids' eyes. The glazed look, where the little valve shuts off in their head and the glazed look comes, like we're just going to endure this until mom and dad are done talking. So listen, ask questions, don't lecture, don't interrogate. You want to introduce your opening doors. That's what tonight is all about, how to open doors, how to introduce dialogues. Find out what they already know. What have you learned about this? But don't interrogate. Who told you that? What were you looking at? You don't want to do that. You want to open doors, ask questions, find out what they already know. And here's something, use media to your advantage. All right, media is messing this whole thing up. Let's turn media back on Satan and use it to our advantage. Because there are some at the end of this talk, I'm going to give you some resources. Wonderful videos, well thought out, that were put together by some awesome organizations. But even popular media, let me give you an example. When our kids, all of whom are in their 30s now, when they were teenagers, there was this show, One Tree Hill. Does anyone remember that? One Tree Hill? Yeah. Dion does. Yeah. So One Tree Hill is basically this preteen, no, it was like this teenage soap opera, right? And it was conceivably one of the most immoral shows that you could ever see. Everyone was having sex with everyone. Everyone was breaking up with people, using people, manipulating people. Not sure why we liked it so much. It did have some engaging plot twists and things like that. So we didn't tell the kids, you're not allowed to watch that sinful stuff. What we did was we would all watch it together. To tell you the truth, I thought it was pretty cool. I liked it. Afterwards, then we used that media as a stage. So this is when our kids were teens, and we'd say, now let's talk about that episode. Do you really think you can have indiscriminate sex with this boy at your school and it's going to happen like it did on that show, where everyone was happy and there were no consequences? Do you really think that could happen and that kids would roll their eyes? No, of course not. So you can use media as a teaching platform. Anything to add? Okay. The last general principle, and probably the most important, is speaking to the child's developmental level. You have to break it down, and you have to make it simple for little kids. Older kids, you can do more complex things with, and I'll explain that more in a second. Another example from my life, before he died, my dad was a pediatrician and my mom was a nurse. So they talked in technical medical language. I'm told that the first word I ever learned was borborygmus, which is the technical name for when your stomach growls. So, they were always shooting things way over my head that I was nowhere close to understanding. So we want to break things down. We want to present things at levels that are appropriate for your child's development. Now, when we've spoken to you before, I think we went over some of this. So I'm just going to speak about it quickly. Let's understand these stages of child development. I think we did this last time we did a parenting workshop for real. So there was this guy, this developmental psychologist named Piaget, and he came up with these theories by observing really his own kid, using his own kid as a psychological subject, which we did quite frequently with our own kids. It's a lot of fun and it's cheap that way. So anyway, he observed his own kids and he learned that cognitive development happens in stages. And he did some research and wrote it down. And this is the way it looks. And you have to understand a little bit about each stage. So the first stage he came up with applies to kids from infancy to age 2. It's called the sensory motor stage of cognitive development. During that time, kids are a blank slate. They're babies, they're infants. They learn, they don't have language yet, so the way they learn is through reflexes, through their neurological reflexes. You're an infant, you don't have language, you've not been here very long, for more than a day or two. But if you roll over on something hot, your body's going to send pain to you and you're going to roll off of it. That's your first lesson. So in the sensory motor period, you're just learning through your reflexes and what happens to you environmentally. Then comes the pre-operational stage from ages 2 to 7. Now, during that time, you know when they're in that period, because if you go to preschool, it's when they develop imaginative play or symbolic play. So that's when you go to the playground at preschool and kids are using a rock to be a truck or something like that. So they're being more imaginative. They're starting to think about things that aren't right there in front of them. They don't need something right there in front of them to understand it. They can think about, be a little bit abstract. But they don't understand logic yet. They can't see things from the point of view of somebody else. They learn very concretely through rewards and consequences. So what I'm saying is, during this pre-operational phase, a lot of parents, especially Christian parents, try to moralize with their kids. You know, you don't play with yourself because it's sinful in the eyes of God. They're not even there yet. You don't, you don't pull your pants down in front of little Susie because ethically that's an inappropriate. No, they're not there yet. Kids just learn through rewards and consequences during this pre-operational phase. So not by lecturing, not by dealing with the ethical issues of sexuality. I'm going to use as an example, we got a call the other day from a good friend of our son's, his best friend, who's raising, he's an adult and a parent, and he's raising 2 little girls. One is 5 and one is 2. Now this brother, I call him a brother, but he's the father of these 2 little kids. This brother's sister is gay and has a lesbian lover who lives with her. The brother calls me and says, my sister and her partner are coming over tonight. How do I explain their relationship to my daughters? And I said, dude, not even there yet. You have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. They don't even understand regular relationships. I said, ask your daughter, who's daddy's daddy or who's daddy's brother? They won't even be able to tell you that. So our advice to them was just say, this is your aunt's friend. That's all they need to know. That's all they, does that make sense? So this is a very concrete period of time, but that brings me to the next section, concrete operational phase from about 7 to 11. Now that's when kids start to be logical. They start thinking logically. That's why we call it concrete operations. And they become less egocentric, less I'm the center of the universe, more sociocentric, realizing that there are other people in the world and you have to watch out for people's feelings and you have to communicate with people. But they still can't think very abstractly and they can't figure out what it means to be in someone else's shoes. So they still won't yet understand what might be sexually offensive to another child of their age. So once again, you kind of teach in terms of rewards and consequences. Now, the last phase, the formal operational phase, that's what happens from age 11 until adulthood. There's no end to this formal operational phase of development. Some people, you know, we all know 50-year-olds who are still really immature. So who knows when it ends? But during this formal operational stage, kids are just now starting to think abstractly, which means they can extrapolate from their experiences. They can begin to think about things that haven't even happened yet, or about things that they've not had any prior experience with. So only just now, from this formal operational stage, from about 11, only now can they begin to contemplate really abstract topics like the existence of God, the needs of other people, their own place in the universe relative to everyone else. So the moral of this slide is, I think that sometimes we expect our teens especially to think in mature, spiritual, abstract ways that they're not yet cognitively prepared for. Now is the time, however, that they're most prone to misinformation. So once again, deliver information at a level that's appropriate for your child's cognitive development. And when you get to that formal operation, that teens, that's why we're going to spend a little more time on them. They may not, you may think they're more mature than they are in terms of abstract thinking and spiritual thinking. So adjust things to the level of their development. Now I'm going to let Mary speak.
I think one of the first things we need parents is remember that we have the best parenting guide in the world in God's word, and we've got to go there, especially with this topic. We've got to lay a biblical foundation for our kids from the Bible, that this is what God says about these issues. Michael and I were talking, sexuality is portrayed in the media and in our culture as either something horrible and disgusting and abusive, or as the end all and be all of existence that has no consequences, And I think we've got to, especially when our kids are young, we've got to let them know that God invented sexuality. And he invented it to be good. He invented it as a gift for us. He's the one that came up with it. Satan is the one that's messed it up, but God is the one that came up with it. The scriptures that we need to, especially when our children are younger, we need to go back to Genesis and teach our kids, this is why God made people, men and women. This is why God made people marry each other. This is when the world was perfect, God invented this. And it's interesting if you think about it, probably the marriage relationship is one of the only things we have left from the Garden of Eden when everything was perfect, So our kids need to know this was meant to be good from the beginning. Genesis 2, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. Our kids need to know these scriptures, that this is what God invented it to be like. He invented it to be a great thing. Later on, when our kids are older, of course, we need to give them some warnings from the Bible about what God warns sexuality, how it could be harmful to us if we're not using it in the right way. Ephesians 5, but among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality, because these are improper for God's holy people. In verse 33, however, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. In 1 Corinthians 7, the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. As our kids get older, we need to teach them that God gave us some principles that we can follow about how sexuality works well, how it is meant to be a blessing to us and not something that's harmful to us. Let's start looking at how do we handle the preschoolers when they come up with questions like, does daddy give you a massage? I think that's a question. I think most of the preschool age stuff falls on moms. I think moms are usually the one that gets most of the preschool questions because we're standing there. My daughter, our grandson just turned 6, and it was about 30 degrees. It was freezing, and the kids had been in the house way too long, and he wanted to go outside and play in the yard for a few minutes. And I just happened to be there, and I was sitting in the house, and of course they bundle all up and they go out in the yard, and she didn't want to be out in the yard. It was so cold. But she told me while they're standing out there, while he's running around in the yard at 30 degrees temperature, is when he decides to have the talk with her about where do babies come from? How did they get in there? How did they get out of there? And it's 30 degrees, she's freezing, so she came in and kind of downloaded the whole conversation and said, how'd I do? And I said, I think you told him. And at the end of it, he told her, as they were talking about, he said, okay, that's enough now. After he'd heard all he wanted to hear, he cut her off. That was all he wanted to know about. But I think it's, especially as moms, we've got to be prepared for those conversations, and we've got to be willing to open up those conversations with our kids. We want them to know you can come to Daddy and I and talk about these things, and we want to be the ones that you come to talk about these things. Like Michael said, if they can't come to us, they're going to find the answer somewhere, and it's going to be someplace you don't want them to go to. Like Michael said, we've got to work at not making this awkward for our kids, which means we've got to get over being awkward about it. Like Michael was saying, the way he was raised, I was raised with a World War II veteran father, very traditional father and mother. Great parents, but a very traditional parenting style and very strict. And my father's whole conversation about sexuality is God made you to be a woman or a man. That's it. That's the end. That's as far as he was going to go with any of it, So you've got to educate yourself, and you've got to get comfortable talking with your kids about it. And like Michael said, if it's not just one big talk, if you kind of talk about it as it comes up, and the kids know that we're going to have a lot of talks about this during the time I'm growing up, I think that helps everybody to be less awkward with it. During this age, kids are mostly going to ask about their own bodies or their friends' bodies or their siblings' bodies. And we need to be able to give them information about that. And then they're going to be interested in where the babies come from. They're going to see their friend's mama is pregnant, or their aunt is pregnant, or, they're going to see this. That's probably the first thing you're going to have to talk to them about. And again, the more prepared you are to give them the information they're asking for. Now, what you don't want to do is go way beyond what they're asking for. My daughter in the yard the other day did not have a whole conversation about marital sex and homosexuality, and they just talked about how does the baby get in there, how does the baby get out. That's all he wanted to know, and that's all he needed to know at that time. So don't go beyond what they're asking. You kind of let them lead you by their questions. Like Michael said already, give them anatomically correct vocabulary, give them the correct words to use. Now, let me warn you, I remember doing this when our son was maybe 3 or 4 years old, and we taught the anatomically correct words. And the next time we went to the mall, he went around at the food court and asked everybody, do you have a penis or a vagina? So you might get yourself in trouble, all right? And you might have to work out a little bit. So we had to have a talk then about privacy, and you don't talk about that with other people.
He did serve his prison sentence for that. I mean, he paid his due. Yeah.
But it's still, they need to know those words. They need to have a speaking vocabulary like that. When our kids are little like this, we can't freak out about them exploring their own bodies. Just exploring and being interested, especially about the differences between boys and girls. That's normal at this age for them to be doing those kind of activities, and we need to be able to help them. We need to teach them about privacy. That everything, your body is private, the other person's body is private. A good way to do it at this age is everything that's covered by your swimsuit, everything that's covered by your bathing suit. So for little boys, this is everything covered by their swim trunks. For little girls, it's a top and the bottom. That's private. All right, yours is private and your sister's is private. So we don't touch it. We don't, that's kind of a good way to start with this. But we can't freak out when they come up with something like this. We tend to think immediately, oh my gosh, something's happened to them. They've been exposed to something. No, this is normal. This is normal questions at that age. What is not normal at this age is them acting out, intercourse, or doing something that's more adult. And if you see something like that, you need to start asking, Where did you see that? Who told you about that? You know, something they've been exposed to something beyond what you would expect a child at this age to be dealing with. Let's talk about, these are some good discussion starters. If you look out at the very bottom, there's that privacy word again, which I think is a great place to start with little kids. Start talking about privacy. You know, you already need to talk with them about, you know, when somebody's in the bathroom and the door is closed, you don't just walk in, right? It's private, you know, so privacy is kind of a concept they need to be learning at this point in their lives anyway. And so it's very easy to just extend that into the area of sexuality. There's another one up there I really like. It says, I found a new book in the library. Let's read it together. You know, there are some good books that are spiritually based, if you look for them, where you can teach your children kind of the biblical principles of sexuality and the books are usually graduated by age level. Yeah, I know we had a series when the kids were growing up called God's Good Gift or something. I'm not even sure if it's still in print. But it started out with the where do babies come from, and men and women are different. And then it kind of graduated up to a teen level where we were talking about more adult things. So I think that's a great place to start, you know, to have a book like that you can read to the kids. I think it's a good place to start. Oh, by the way, this is from a website called Amaze. I don't know if that's on your, is that on your? Okay.
Resources.
Before we go on, let me go back real quick down to that last point. Mary and I have done over the years we've seen many sexually abused kids for evaluation. If they do start doing something that's inappropriate for their age, and we say all the time, behaviors like that don't happen in a vacuum, something they've learned it somewhere. Once again, don't freak out. Question, don't freak out. If you freak out, then they're going to clam up. They're going to be terrified because you're terrified. So if further questioning is warranted, you do so calmly and you do so in a not interrogating way, and I'm going to, you know, tell me who did this. I'm going to knock their block off. Nothing like that. At some point, involving authorities may be necessary, but that's another, I think that's another lecture. Yeah. So we're going to talk about we're going to move on to the next phase. And I know you're full of questions probably. We're going to defer the questions until the end and have a lot of time for Q&A. We just want to make sure we get through our main point. So let's go to the next age level, which are the elementary grades from ages 7 to 10. There's going to be some hot topics that emerge during this stage. Once again, if you've laid a proper foundation, if you've opened the doors, if you've approached this all in a non-awkward, non-tense, freak-out way, these hot topics will be easy to deal with, but we want to show you the ones that you're going to encounter most often.
One of the first ones is menstruation with little girls. And again, you want to start early. You want to be preemptive. You want to teach your daughter about this before she hears it from somebody else. And some girls, you know, start menstruating as early as 9 or 10 these days. So we're probably talking about late elementary school, 4th, 5th grade that you're talking about. You're talking to your daughters about this. Again, give her the basic physical details of this. You know, teach her, you know, she may be hearing scary things, you know, in gym class from other girls, you know, so you want to teach her the basics of this and let her ask you questions and kind of lead the conversation. But assure her that she can talk to you about this without being embarrassed, that she doesn't need to be embarrassed. It doesn't need to be awkward, that it's natural and normal. Again, that it's something God created. And that she doesn't need to feel like this is something that she has to hide or be embarrassed about. You know, a good conversation starter for this is, do you know if any of your friends have started their periods yet? Or is anybody at school talking about having their period? Do you have any questions about that? So we just need, again, to be prepared and to be at the forefront before they hear it from somebody else.
All right, Mary dealt with the sensitive girl topic at this point. I'm going to move on to a couple of sensitive boy topics. So let's get this one out of the way, dealt with. Erections. Let's admit it, erections are weird. They're complicated to explain to little kids. We have to ensure our sons that they're normal, because one day they're going to have one, not going to know what started it or where it came from, and they're going to wonder what it is. And we have to make it clear that you often don't have any control over it. So they don't think they've been possessed by a demon or something like that. Sometimes these things just happen. Once again, if you've used correct vocabulary from the start, it will be much easier to explain, and you can say it in a non-awkward way. Now, I'm a dad, a bunch of you guys are dads. You know that this can be a point of tremendous pride or a point of tremendous shame. So we have to kind of pull back on our humor, right? And we have to pull back on our somewhat off-color terms that we used as middle schoolers in the locker room. Okay, we don't want those to be our son's first introductions to the vocabulary of erections. We want them to be called erections. We also want sons to know that they may have a wet dream, because whether they have been told or not, they're going to have one and they're going to freak out and be scared to death, maybe. I don't know. So that's a subject that needs to be broached. Once again, this whole thing doesn't have to be embarrassing. I'm gonna share another thing about my life, and then I'm gonna totally deny it. And if you guys ever say this to anyone, I'm gonna deny it. When I was a little kid, I remember sitting on the toilet and sometimes having an erection that was totally unpredicted and unexpected. And I was so proud of it that I would take a piece of toilet paper and put a hole in it and put it on like a cape, like Superman's cape on my penis. So I'm just sharing that to be open. Don't ever tell that to anyone else. And when you make this a recording, erase that part. I'm just trying to be open with, I think I had a very comfortable relationship with my erections as a little kid. And if we do this right, that's what's going to happen to your child. So have lots of toilet paper available for making capes. No, don't do that part. What about masturbation? I mean, good heavens, this is an ethically complex issue, isn't it? No matter what age you are. So the urge is completely normal. The ethics of it, whether or not to allow it, we're going to leave that up to your family. It's a family specific thing. Just remember this. They're going to do it, and they're going to do it somewhere. This is a terrible experience I'm going to share from my camp, experience that I was talking about. When we were in middle school, I think, I remember one of our stupid little compatriots who already knew how to masturbate, trying to show the rest of us how to do it. So once again, we learned everything inappropriately and incorrectly. So you want to be preemptive and deal with this before it becomes an issue. So once again, they're probably going to do it. They're probably going to do it somewhere. So they have to be informed about the urge and not be made to feel ashamed about it. Now, the ethics of masturbation are much different once they become married adults. Then it's a different thing. Then we're dealing with, I've heard some people say, Christians say, well, if you're masturbating as a married adult, you're making love to somebody that isn't your spouse. Well, that's interesting to look at it that way. We've heard some people say, if you can control your thoughts and just direct your imaginings to your spouse, then it's okay. We're going to leave these highly complex adult married issues up to you. When it comes to kids, just remember they're going to do it, so you need to be proactive and help them to not feel ashamed about the urge. What you do after that is kind of, like I said, we're going to leave that up to your family. You want to add anything?
No.
Okay. So before we go on to the hot topics of the next stage of development, which is pre-adolescence, let's talk about some general principles for talking to this age group. So we're talking about the kids from 11 to 18. Picking the right time is important. Once again, you don't want to interrogate, and we don't want to make it the one big talk. Where you set out, you take the day off of work, you set out the time just to have this one big talk. It doesn't work that way. Don't interrogate. What have you been up to? What do you know? You know, it needs to be a comfortable, relaxed setting to bring it up. You open the door and then allow the topic to kind of evolve naturally. Once again, this may be a way to allow for you. So you see a scene in the movie and you ask your child, what do you know about that? Or what do you think about that? You all freaked out, you want to handle it comfortably. So picking the right time is important. This could be just while you're, when we give parenting workshops, we talk a lot about communicating with your kids at times where it's just spontaneous, like you're driving them home from school or you're on an errand together or something like that. So those are good times when it's just you and your child to talk about these things. Once again, don't lecture. Teens are great at I always say teenagers have a valve in their head. And when they're done hearing something or they're embarrassed, they shut that valve off and you see this blank expression come over their face and you know this is not, now they're just enduring a lecture. We don't want it to be that way. We want you to be a good non-judgmental listener, not a finger wagger. And this is super important too, talking about when you start talking about sex and dating. Once again, dating as an issue itself is a family decision. Mary and I once had someone come up to us in a workshop and they said, what is the church's view on dating? And that kind of took us by surprise. And we said, the church shouldn't have a view on dating. That's between you and your Bible and your family. That's between you and your God and family. So we talk about sex, including dating, as a series of choices, not rules, not mandates, not I will not allow this in my house or I will allow this in my house. You talk about the pros and cons of each decision. What are the pros and cons of dating? What are the pros and cons of premarital sex? If we talk about dating at all, you definitely want to make it clear what dating means. I've had tons of patients, little pre-adolescent patients or early adolescent patients, come up to me and say, like they're in 6th or 7th grade, and they say, I have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. We started dating. And I, in my typically sarcastic way, will sometimes say to the 10 or 11-year-old, oh, so does that mean you pay for her dinner and you go out and watch a movie in your dad's car? You know, and they said, oh, we joke about it. So we have to be clear what dating means. Sometimes to them, it just means holding hands. So before you get freaked out about dating, make sure you're clear about what they're talking about. And once again, make it clear what dating means for your family and what you're going to allow or not allow under your roof. Whoops. We also like to talk about discussing strategies to deal with sexual pressure, not do's and don'ts for your adolescents and pre-adolescents, but as strategies, because they're going to experience sexual pressure. So let's say you've done everything right so far, and your kids have a healthy respect for sex, healthy respect for their own bodies, and a biblical framework to think about sex. Now, what do? You can't sequester them. You can't put them in a bubble. You can't, that just wouldn't be good for them. So now we talk about, you're going to face pressure. You're going to face sexual pressure. Son or daughter, I'm glad you're determined to do this the right way. I'm glad you're determined to do it God's way, but you're going to be under pressure. So let's talk about some strategies. For example, you go on a date with your boyfriend. What limits are you going to set? What is he not allowed to do with you? Where is he not allowed to touch you? And you talk about that. If you're with a friend of the opposite sex and you're going over just to watch a movie, what are you going to do that might be better, that won't invite sexual pressure? Like instead of lounging around on the couch watching a movie, why don't you think of some other activity?
But yeah,
okay.
Keep going. I'll add at the end.
And once again, make this an ongoing conversation, not just a one-time birds and bees talk. This is a constantly evolving thing, and everything that you hear from your preteen or teen is going to be shocking, and you're going to have to regroup and think about it and talk to your spouse. So it's not just a one-time thing.
One of the things I just wanted to add here is, as parents, You know your children better than anyone else. And so you need to feel empowered to make rules for your kids that you think fits your child. You know, some kids at 15 or 16 years old may be ready to go out on a date. They may be mature enough. They may be responsible enough. They may have decided they want to be a disciple, you know, and you may feel good about who they're going out with. You know, another child at 15 or 16 years old may be very immature and you don't feel like they're capable of making good choices on a date. So you as a parent need to make rules for your kids based on who they are and what you know is going to be the best for them, and not feel you know, it's not a one size fits all, I guess is what I'm saying. You need to be wise about what is beneficial for your child at these ages and what is not beneficial for your kids at this age.
And lastly, once again, going to the last point on the slide, now is the time in this stage of development where they can handle more discussions, deep spiritual discussions about the Bible's view about sex. And now we can differentiate between love and sex, between the act of sex and what sex is supposed to be in what framework of a loving, committed relationship. I'm going to brag on our eldest daughter, who was in music. She was really big into musical theater when she was in high school, was in all the plays and all the show choirs and things like that. She, the pinnacle of her acting career was a senior in high school, and she got a lead in the senior play. Coincidentally, across the male lead was a boy, not a disciple, not in our family of churches, but a decent boy from a good family. So they were, and she was kind of in love with him. She always had kind of a crush on him. And so all during that senior year, we talked to her about her feelings towards him and what happens, you know,
Not being yoked with
non-believers. What would happen if you had a relationship with this guy and you find out he has different convictions than you? When they were in this play, there was a scene where they were supposed to kiss each other. And this would have been her first kiss. And because she had by then developed biblical convictions, thank God, not us, she decided to ask the director. She said to the director, I don't want this to be my first kiss experience. Can you please block the scene so it looks like we're kissing, but we're not? So God bless her, and God bless you. If you lay the foundation, biblical foundation early enough, hopefully they'll develop that kind of attitude. Now let's talk about some of the hot topics in adolescence. Really, at this age, everything's a hot topic. Everything you hear about sex from your teenager is going to make your brain cave in or your head explode. But here are some that really need to be covered. And any one of these could be an entire one-day workshop. So instead of us trying to cover the whole thing, we're just going to tell you to draw on all your resources, including the school, including books, and including, once again, more experienced Christian parents, and including the Bible. And in a few minutes, we'll give you some of these resources, but here are some brief hints we want you to think about. So STDs, man, that's a terrible thing to have to tell your teens about, but you have to tell your teens about it if they haven't learned about it already in school health class. These days, you kind of have to educate yourself first. Make sure you have your medical facts on straight before you broach this topic with your teenager. Most importantly, please make it clear to your teen, as you're having this embarrassing talk about STDs, that some STDs have no symptoms. You can have an STD and be totally asymptomatic, and the infection can spread not only within you and eventually make you symptomatic and sicker, but from one person to another, even while you feel healthy and you look healthy. So this is a good time to have this talk, because hopefully by this time they haven't even started to have sex yet. And I'm not saying use a talk about STD as a scare them into being chaste. Don't do that, but you do want to warn them. This is part of making decisions. So they haven't started having sex yet. This is a good time to introduce this topic. Again, maybe while you're doing something else that serves as a springboard. You know, I had written it in my notes like a song on the radio or a movie scene, but then I thought, I can't think of any songs about STDs on the radio. So I don't know, think of a better springboard to begin this conversation. Oral sex. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine talking to your teenager about oral sex? Well, you better imagine it, because don't be shocked. If they feel comfortable enough with you and things haven't been awkward, they're going to bring it up. And they're going to want to do it because they're curious about it. And they certainly can do it in the context of marriage. So when this comes up, don't act shocked and don't say, "Where did you hear that?" They're going to hear it. Use proper terminology. Don't be guarded or mysterious about it. And again, don't be judgmental, because once again, if they don't do this now before they're married, they're going to do it sometime when they're married. Just avoid the too much information. Okay. Avoid the TMI on this one. Pornography, which again, that could be that could be a one-day workshop. What I want you to know, back in my day, when I was at the summer camp, our version of pornography was, and I'll never forget it, we had a deck of cards that my friend Howie had. It was a deck of cards with nude women on it. For 7 years, that was our pornography. We brought it every summer to summer camp, and we shared this deck of cards. That was about as far as it got, until someone, of course, found Playboy under their dad's mattress, and then we moved it up to another level. Those were the tame days. I don't need to tell you now that now they can access pornography in ways you, as old people who don't understand the internet as well as they do, can't even fathom. So this is the point I want to make about pornography. Devices, we want to empower you. Devices don't belong to your children. Your children are going to say, "This is my cell phone. You can't take away my cell phone. You can't take away my tablet. Put away my computer." If they do that, ask them to show you the contract that they signed with Verizon when they took full responsibility to purchase and maintain the devices account. There's a misunderstanding that these properties belong to children. You fully control these properties. This is not a democracy. So be wise about protecting your kids by putting all safeties in place, all the blocks that you can do. And even taking up devices, we talk about this in parenting workshops, taking up devices at the end of the day and charging them all in your room as the parents. This will become the fortress of devices. We've had some parents do that, and believe it or not, they've caught their kids trying to sneak in at 3 a.m. under the bed to get to their devices. But this is the point. You control the devices. You can control, to a great extent, their access to porn. It doesn't belong to them. Rant over. Gender issues. This is another one, big topic. And we would advise you to look at the material that our friend Guy Hammond has put together on his website, Strength and Weakness. And I'll give you that website in a minute. Guy Hammond is the world's foremost Christian leader, in our opinion, on this topic, and has dealt with pretty much every kind of question you can think of and posts questions from parents on his website. What we want you to know is this. When your kid comes home and says, "I'm," and then fill in the blank, because now there's lots of it. There's not just "I'm gay," or "I'm same-sex attracted," or "I'm lesbian." Now there's "I'm bisexual, asexual, multisexual." I have a whole list in my office because I forget them and I rarely understand what all of them mean. Here's the interesting thing. A lot of the kids don't understand what they mean when they're even saying that's what they are. A lot of these things they've just heard from their friends, or they've been subject to social media and have been told by their friends or social media, "You're this way," or "You should consider being this way," or "Think about being this way." So don't panic is the message we want to get to you. Don't immediately panic and think, "Oh my goodness, my child has suddenly come out or wants to be transgender," or something like that. Most of the times the kids are misinformed. So being judgmental, if you're judgmental right out the gate, all you're going to do is make them dig in their heels more and further adopt this identity that they're claiming. So again, you want to be preemptive and introduce way ahead of time the biblical view of sexual identity preemptively, so that your kids know I'm not just making this up. This isn't just my opinion. This is what God says. To that end, I'm going to have Mary share this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna let you read these scriptures off the screen for yourself, you know them. But I think there's a couple of thoughts I had while he was talking. One is that we need to communicate to our kids that these scriptures that are in the Bible, God's not trying to make life difficult for them. All right. This is not, I mean, he's not just setting up limits, you know, just to set up limits. God is trying to protect them from things that are going to be harmful to them. You know, the rules are there because God knows how damaging going outside of the way he created sex to be is to us. And we've got to be able to communicate that to our kids, that God is trying to save you. You know, I think about when I was in private practice, especially, I saw a lot of young adolescent girls that were not in Christian families. I mean, they were just out there in the world, God bless them, trying to be teenage girls, you know. And a lot of them became sexually active, and they had gone to health class and they knew that they could get pregnant or they could get an STD or something like that. What nobody had ever told them are what some of the emotional and spiritual consequences to engaging in immorality was to them. You know, how it made them feel different about themselves, how people treated them differently sometimes because of things that they had done. No one told them that that's a toll, that's a consequence to being sexual, you know, before outside of marriage. And so somehow we've got to be prepared to tell our kids these rules are in God's word because he's trying to save you. I mean, oh my gosh, how many of us before we were Christians, you know, how many of us look back at things that we did before we were Christians and think, oh my gosh, I wish I had never done that. I wish I had never been involved in that relationship. We've got to let our kids know God is trying to help you with these rules. You know, that having been said, you know, when I look at these scriptures, I think of the verse that talks about preach the word in season and out of season. I mean, how out of season are these verses, right now? It's not politically correct. All right. But our kids need to know this is what God says in his word. This is God has said this. This is not something mom and dad are making up or is a rule for you. This is something that God says is right or wrong, you know. And I think this is where, you know, with our kids, this is one big area where they start rubbing against, am I going to follow the world or am I going to follow what God says? You know, they've got to start making there's a conflict there for sure in this area. And our kids have got to decide which am I going to be? You know, which one am I going to be? What am I going to make it standard for my life? The last thing, and I think this is a huge point, you know, right now, the way that things are being portrayed, especially with alternative sexuality, is that you were born that way. You know, if you're attracted to your own sex, you were born that way. You just need to be true to yourself and you know, if whatever, you know. And here's the thing is all of us are responsible for the way that we act out our sexuality, right? All of us make choices about, you know, regardless of who we're attracted to, we're not attracted to, or what kind of temptations we have to make a choice about how we're going to live out our sexuality. And we need to let our kids know it is a choice. It comes down to a choice. You know, I think Guy Hammond's work is marvelous at the way he portrays this, that you get to choose. It's not like it was predetermined that you're going to be this or that, you know, because that's kind of what they're getting from the world these days is, oh, that's the way you can't do anything about that. That was predetermined, you know. No, you get to choose how you act, how you live out your sexuality. There's a great book. If you guys haven't read it, I strongly recommend. Of course, guy stuff is wonderful, like we said. There's another book called Homosexuality and the Christian, and it's by a psychologist by the name of Jay Yarhouse, Yarhouse. If you have not read it, I strongly recommend that you get a copy and read it, because he talks about presenting sexuality as a choice, that you get to choose how you handle your sexuality.
I'm going to quickly put that in the chat. It's called Homosexuality. Oops. And the Christian by Yarhouse. Because that's not on my resource slide that I'm going to show you at the end. So we'll put that in the chat for you.
All right, the last subject we're going to try to broach a little bit is, how do you do this with children who are emotionally challenged in some way? And I would add on that, you know, if you have a child that has an intellectual challenge of some type, you know, a child that's on the autism spectrum or that has an intellectual disability, or if you have a child that's been traumatized, you know, a child that's already been exposed to an abusive situation, let's say. How do you handle these subjects? They still, I won't say they still need this just like every other child. I would say they need it more than other children. And so, you know, we may have to work harder at teaching them some of these principles. You know, again, don't interrogate. You know, you need to ask the child, what do you already know? What have you already been exposed to? What are your questions? And let them lead the discussion, lead the conversation. You know, you need to assure the child that nothing that they ask or talk about or say to you is going to affect your feelings for them. You know, that you can tell me anything, honey, and I'm still your mom, I'm still your dad, I'm going to love you. We'll work this out somehow. You know, no blame or assigning fault to a child. You know, if a child has been exposed to sexuality very early or been abused, they're going to act out what they have been exposed to, you know, and you feel like, I mean, if you catch them doing it, you're going to feel like, I need to punish this. And, you know, but what you need to do is help them to figure out, you know, that it helps them to see that they have come into this knowledge way before they're ready for it, you know, and protect them first for it. Again, the children who are intellectually disabled, let's say, they may act on sexual impulses without any thought, you know, and you need to teach them, this is something that could be harmful to you, it could be harmful to the people around you, this is how we handle it in a very concrete way. You know, look for indicators of sexual or physical trauma in kids, you know, especially if it's a child in your home that is coming out of another living situation, coming out of an orphanage or foster care situation, or out of a family that has been unstable. You know, typically what we see with kids are things like mood swing and withdrawing. They can be aggressive. Again, you may see some adult sexuality in children that's way beyond their age level. You know, things like nightmares and fears can sometimes indicate that a child has been exposed to something. And so again, ask questions and, you know, try to make the child feel safe and ask questions. Lastly, if you need help, get help. You know, if you feel like my child needs counseling, they may need counseling. You know, all it's going to hurt is your pocket. So be proactive and get your children whatever kind of help they may need.
Speaking of help, and with a list of resources, now don't try to write all this down. I'm going to let Barnabas and everyone clip this little slide off our presentation and share it with anyone you want. Fortunately, you're not in this alone, and there's tons of really good resources. Let me get my pointer up there. That we mentioned this website before, Amaze it's called. has some extremely practical, actual videos of parents kind of scripting, modeling this for how to talk to your kids. That's a great one for if you want some really practical, this is how it's done. UC Davis Children's Hospital has a whole segment of practical videos like that. Focus on the Family, of course, the perennial faith-based parenting resource. CDC, nothing but love for the CDC. They answer everything. They have a whole section on positive parenting practices, which is very good. You might not know this, but our government has an Office of Adolescent Health, and they've got some resources on there. There's also another organization, and this is I think this is a nonprofit, non-federal, Advocates for Youth and Parent-Child Communication, and they have a sub thing called Promoting Sexually Healthy Youth. That's a great resource. The National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy, which is an extremely uncomfortable thought, which is why it's such a good resource and such a good thing to look into. And lastly, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services at healthfinder.gov, they have a section called Talk to Your Kids About Sex. So once again, the beauty of this is you're not in this fight on your own. Lots of resources, lots of tools for your toolkit. So if you're totally, at the end of this discussion, you feel like you've been getting your drink of water from a fire hose, you can look at this one piece at a time. And lastly, now, here's my little Q&A comic. I thought that was funny. It's a little COVID humor. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my slide so we can have a nice discussion. And like I said, those resources, we'll find a way to get them to you. We're going to stop screen sharing so we can see everybody.